let's get comfortable. And if you guys are ready, we'll close our eyes together. And during the day, it requires us to be thinking in terms of forward motion, which, as we've discussed many, many times, is rooted in the belief, you could say, or to state that positively, the understanding of time and space. And it is so necessary and so beautiful to be able to conceptualize in this way. And also, if left completely unchecked, it can inadvertently build up some tension in the body and the mind. There are several ways we all have found to relieve that tension. And one way can begin to deconstruct or undermine the overemphasis on what we're seeing as forward motion. It can be helpful to deconstruct or undermine what is presented to us as forward motion being all that important. If we can begin to kind of backpedal, deconstruct, or undermine what is presented to us as forward motion, what's important for us to do next, or where we're trying to get to, or how we're trying to feel, or goals we have, in such a way that they are seen as of relative importance. And then we can begin to relieve some of that tension. In the body and in the mind. So therefore, we always say, anytime we would like to feel more centered, if and when our eyes are open, or meditate, if and when our eyes are closed, is to simply notice what's already happening, what's already here. And as always, we don't mean a conceptual understanding, which oftentimes is what creates is the very thing that creates the tension in the body. But more so, just to notice. Experientially, what's already here. What's already happening. If we can render thought as only being relatively truthful or relevant, then immediately we fall from what people refer to as the head to the heart. If we can render thought only relatively truthful or relevant, then we fall from what people refer to as the head to the heart. And in this process of falling from the head to the heart, we may notice thoughts still arising, even though we have mostly settled in the heart. Or even though we may still feel in the head. Whichever the case may be, there is no goal for this. There is no expectation of where we should be in this process of centering if and when our eyes are open, or meditating if and when our eyes are closed. It is just simply where we find ourselves. We are always free, just where we find ourselves. We are always free just where we find ourselves, unless we refer to something that creates limits. Unless we refer to something that defines boundaries. Unless we refer to something that can define the conditions in which freedom wouldn't exist. Freedom is everywhere, always, unless we refer to something that defines the conditions in which freedom doesn't exist. Which doesn't imply that these conditions in which thought has defined where freedom doesn't exist isn't important at the relative level, or shouldn't be addressed at the relative level, because it should, and it is important. It is relative to the subconscious level, the soul work, which cannot, perhaps I could say, be ignored. Just as the thoughts and desires of the conscious mind or the human level has an importance to it at a relative level and cannot be ignored entirely. But yet, simultaneously recognize the power of not referring to them when appropriate. if thought is only true relative to something else, then where is the point of origin of this relative truth? If each thought is only relatively true based on a thought prior, you could say, can it be traced back all the way to the initial thought in which everything else is based on? If every thought is only relatively true, can we trace back to the initial thought or belief in which everything else is based on? We would need to become really clear on each thought being only relatively true as well. Is there any thought that can stand alone? And be true? Without any context, without something to refer to? Can any thought stand alone and be true without context or something to refer to? I think our attempts would be to say something like, God is being a standalone truth, or I am being a standalone truth. But are they really? We may also think existence, or the fact of existing, is a standalone truth. But is it? What is the difference between the indirect knowledge that a thought would be when it says God versus the direct experience of God? To even label God as such would be to separate ourselves from God as a separate subject of experience, something other than God. And to separate ourselves from God doesn't make the phrase God seem like it can really stand on its own. It seems as if the very act of labeling something else as God is to really devalue God. Because how could we separate ourselves from something that we are? So perhaps in the act of separating in order to label, it immediately nullifies the standalone potential of the word God. So does any truth more than just a relative truth? Can any truth stand on its own and be truthful? Is it really truthful to say God is a standalone truth? Or is it the ultimate blasphemy to suggest that? To separate ourselves from the whole, from God, to be able to label God, suggests that we are something other than God, in which could stand apart from God and label it God. Or is the term God only true relative to the possibility of something or someone not being God? So any utterance of the word God would be the most untruthful truth there is. Is there any truth that is true absolutely? Or is all truth only relative to something prior, to something else? And if so, is there an origin, an origin truth in which all other subsequent truths are based upon? Or rather to say, is there an origin thought that all relative truths are based upon? Is there an origin thought that all relative truths are based upon? And I think the other two primary ones that come to mind as a possibility are existence and I am. And perhaps they're both similar. So for something to actually exist would mean it would have to stand out as something independent from everything else, or from anything at all. In order for ourself or existence itself to, in fact, exist, it would have to stand out from everything or anything else. Would it be possible for ourself or anything to stand out and seemingly exist without thought crediting it, and giving it an apparent existence? Would it be possible for ourself or anything to stand out apart from apart? Would it be possible for anything to ourself or something to stand out without thought crediting it with such an existence? Think of a dream as an analogy. in the dream, we accredit. We credit there being people, buildings, cars, landscapes. And it really seems like there's an existence, a whole world that's occurring in the dream world. You can't argue how real that is. Everyone in that dream world would think you were crazy if you were to say they don't exist. Because they're right. They do exist. But only from a relative level. From the level of the dream. Now, of course, when we wake up in the morning and reflect back on that dream world, we know that there is not an actual world there. There is nothing there that really stands out as something other. There's nothing there that really existed. But watch the power of thought, crediting there being an existence. It is in the thought itself that dream will feel like it existed or will be recognized as not existed, not really something there. It's in the power of the thought. It's important for us not to try to make a philosophical statement here, but rather for ourselves, just witness this inner mechanism. Attempt to witness thought giving credit to something as having an independent existence, and as such, appearing to stand out, and then allowing that to collapse, and just witnessing the way in which nothing stands out. We're just wanting to witness this for ourselves. It is in us crediting something or ourselves with an existence that does create the appearance of something standing out. I'm just interested in witnessing this for ourselves. We are master creators. And we don't even realize it. We don't even quite realize to the extent we are master creators. And go ahead and take a moment to ask yourself this deeper part of yourself that does deal with existence and that does have a soul mission to attend to, and that does have real human problems and desires. What is it that these parts of myself most need to know at this time? ready, you can slowly begin to bring back online all of the relative truths. And give credit to whatever is needed. And allow ourselves to come back into our normal way of thinking, back into our body, while holding with us whatever it was on our journey that we'll be keeping close to our hearts moving forward. And when you're ready, and only when you're ready, feel free to take in a deep breath and open your eyes.